Jose, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and your background?
Sure. My name is Jose Escola, and I work for Spectrum, or Charter Communications. And so I'm a senior manager in charge of the application and services group, and the company is really heavily investing in a whole new set of everything, frankly, from a new cable box to new software to new backend that manages all that, as well as enterprise, and it's really reworking the way cable it does things and bringing it to the 21st century. Thank you.
Welcome, we're glad to have you. Kevin Schuchard, that's how you say his name. Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yep. It's Schuchard, actually.
I can never get it right.
Yeah, we joke about it at work all the time. So I work at Prebug. I'm a software developer there. I've been there for about 3 years. Moved out here from Tennessee, so I'm not a native, but love living and working here, and spend a lot of time in Angular. So.
Cool. I wonder if David can reach the next little arrow button there. Thank you. Matt Vaughn, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm a native of Colorado. I've been here all my life and love living and working here. I have been developing web-based applications since 1998. Started with VB Script and ASP and these ActiveX controls way back when. But a lot of different technologies between there and now. And today I focus on Angular for the web side of things. And my kind of passion after my day job, which is at a medical device company in Longmont, where I'm a lead architect and engineer there. I spend a lot of time with the Angularlicious website and podcast, so check it out if you can. And I have a couple NPM open source projects for a rules engine and another framework for processing business logic at Build Motion. So anyway, that's a little bit about me, and I'm glad to be here and look forward to meeting everyone.
Thank you very much. Awesome. All right, and last but certainly not least is David East.
My name is David East. I'm a developer advocate at Google. I work on the Firebase team. I used to part-time work on the Angular team, and my claim to fame is that I don't know why they assigned it to me, but I gave the first ever Angular 2 talk, and I also currently lead the Angular Fire library.
I know within the context of what I do on a daily basis, we need to start developing automation tools to help make things more efficient, frankly. And one of the things I started to really fall in love with Angular is the fact that it really provided a boilerplate of everything, so I didn't necessarily have to worry about any other concept, because it was to some extent self-contained the way I see it. And so I can now just stand up a brand new environment, and it gives me everything I need, and I can just start to actually develop instead of having to worry about setting things up from scratch.
To add on to that, I think one of the main reasons our team chose it is because it's very conventional and very opinionated. And I think when you talk about opinion, some people have a negative viewpoint on that. But the opinions and the way Angular does things is really good and provides a lot of consistency for our team. So for us, we have 5 to 6 different Angular apps, and consistency is really key because we can work on all of them. They're created the same way. We use the CLI, the tooling is great, and it's the breadth of everything we have. But one of the main reasons why we chose Angular is because of the community. We think of events like this, things that Prebug is doing, the NG conference here in Denver next month. Things like that are really awesome. In fact, I don't think I've seen any technology in the last 20 years have this kind of community support behind it in such a short period of time. And the resources to learn and to be involved and to get involved is really good. So it was a really easy decision for our team to do that.
I'm going to speak for Prebug, hopefully, that you know, it checks all the boxes for us. It's performant, it's easy to test, and you know, it's a proven enterprise-backed framework, and yeah, I mean, just checks all the boxes.
So I make a library called Angular Fire, and I was started it from scratch and made it, and everything seemed great. And then people started using it, and things were not as great. So is anyone here familiar with Zone.js? You shouldn't be. If you are, you have problems. So like Zone.js is like, remember we used to call scope.apply and like Angular.js to get everything just to appear on the page, because it's like, well, Angular's not aware of what is happening because this is asynchronous, so you have to wrap it in that function so it appears on the view. Well, zones are supposed to solve that, and so you're just supposed to be totally invisible to you. But if you know about them, it's because they're either causing things to show up too much or not at all. And so in our case, it was not at all. I mean, sorry, not at all, it's too much. And so zones sort of, it's this library that it provides basically an asynchronous call stack. So like when you do things asynchronously, it jumps from one hole to the next, to the next, to the next, and it's really hard to keep track of where you are. Zones are supposed to be able to like be aware of everything that happened in order when it's asynchronous. So it's like really helpful when you're doing a lot of really async things, and it comes out of like the dark world, and it's like there's another language in Google. It's like native in there, and it works really well there. So they try to port the library to work, so when you do things in Angular, things just change, and it's fine. For us, though, we use the Angular Fire is just sort of RxJS and the Firebase SDK, and the Firebase SDK does lots of crazy things. It runs a lot of background timers to make sure you're still connected to the network, to make sure that your authentication is still running, and all these things. Zones gets really deep in there and basically knows when all those things are happening, but it assumes those things are render changing. So every time someone fires off an event, like, are we still authenticated? Zones is like, I know what you want to do. You want to render, and then it has to go through like a change detection cycle, and Angular's like, wait, no, back off, we don't want to render. But that's still another process that kicks off that's like expensive and unnecessary. So we had to refactor the entire library to basically get back to the scope.digest era where we say only do things when these things happen. And it was really painful. And so Angular actually has have you ever heard of the on-push strategy for change detection? It basically gets rid of the need for zones, because it says every time an observable emits, just re-render, and that's it. I don't have to be really secretive about when asynchronous things happen. If the observable emits, re-render. And that's all I want, and that's something that Angular's sort of like moving towards, is just saying, hey, if you're using observables, you can cut zones out completely, and you can just re-emit, and then go. That's it. That's probably my largest gripe. But so I have more, but I'll just stick with that one.
I think for our team, we quickly had 4 to 5 different applications, and we want to be able to share code and reuse things amongst these applications. And I think early on for our team, it was really kind of difficult to do this, and I was struggling with how to create these reusable libraries or packages, or what the cool kids call now libs, right? These libs, how do you create these libs? And how do you get it into an environment and a workflow that's really efficient for your development team? So initially we started developing these packages. We were building them out, we were pushing them, and we were bringing them into these applications like npm install, via file references, upping the versions, and all that. So that development workflow was 8 or 9 different steps, and it was really not working out for our team. So we decided to move to a monorepo workspace environment using Narwhal NX. And this is something that's really not provided by the Angular core team. Until recently, they have support now for workspaces, which you can have multiple apps and libs, or libraries, or projects. There's so many different names for these things now, in a single workspace environment. However, it's really kind of a file-based reference in the Angular workspace, and you're really not able to, you can build these libraries or these libs using ng-packager, which is now part of Angular 6. And that's the coolest thing I think that's come about. But getting from way back when to now, in just the last probably 6 to 9 months, it's really changed. The Angular team is now publishing a specific format for packages. NG Packager is the default tool, the standard now to use for that. And you have to do a lot of working in your environment to get that, if you want to publish packages to like NPM for other people to use. If you're just on a team and it's all local, workspaces work just fine. But for me, I think from the very beginning, I wish Angular would have thought more about reusability in terms of libraries and these modules so that it would make it easier to share code amongst different applications. But it's getting better, and it's workable now, and I think Narwhal NX extensions really helps do that.
I have one myself, especially starting off in Angular, is what are the best practices? And not based on what the community thinks, because everyone loves to debate presentational, non-presentational, nested or non-nested. And so I know I've started to go my own way with respect to what I like to do and what I like to set up. And so whenever I start a new project, I go based on my experience. I like to set the project up in a specific way and or change the schema or whatnot. I just, to some extent, especially when I first started with Angular, I wish they would have provided a more like user-friendly way of saying, when starting off a new project, maybe these are the certain recommended ways that you should set up a new component or whatnot. Well, because one of the difficult things that I've ended up finding out early on is that I would build up components and interlace them, and it was beautiful and it works great, except that now I have a new Angular app, and it's just easier to stand up a brand new project and have to migrate forward, and then I have to rip everything out in all of its tentacles instead of being nice container. And I know with the new Angular, they're starting to allow that. So that's kind of exciting. At least in my case, is sometimes a little hard to keep up with, only because of the fact that I've gotten into this like nervous thing where anytime there's a new release, I just automatically push it, because I'd rather deal with those small changes than have to wait, let's say, a full year, and everything is just so different that it ends up breaking everything. And so, for example, when 6 dropped and it had some breaking changes, luckily it wasn't too difficult. RxJS was the biggest one with respect to how they did it, and so that was kind of an easy catch. But I won't truly know until I update and then get a bunch of error codes and find out what I need to upgrade one. So to some extent, I do wish that they would elongate the major releases to at least once a year and give everyone kind of a chance to catch up and really breathe and get used to this cycle while doing small fixes and then getting everyone ready for that very next cycle.
And I think it's good until it's bad, but given that it's every 6 months, I would hope that they're not rewriting the framework every 6 months. And that's not a ton of time to make a lot of big breaking changes, although they could. But I think as long as they keep going, with the change from 5 to 6 wasn't that bad in my opinion. Like we said, RxJS was the main culprit there, but I think it pushes us to manage our applications like we do our code, just small incremental changes over time.
So one of the things that about the upgrades, I think every 6 months is good, and I think that you want more and more change, and you want to also avoid feeling that pinch to be like, oh, Angular 6 is out, I'm only at 5, I need to totally upgrade. No, you don't. You can wait till it works best. It's only difficult when you are a library author and then all of a sudden Angular 6 drops and everyone's like, hey, you need to support Angular 6. And then at that point you probably do, because it's like you have a lot of your code base going. And so like what you're saying with the RxJS, that was actually really difficult for us with Angular Fire, because there's no, unless you use the RxJS compat library, there's no back path to that. And so we basically had to set up this whole if you use it this way, it works like this. But if you use it this way, it works like this. And it was stuff like that's difficult. But if you're just building your app, there should be no pressure for you to say I have to go to 6, I have to go to 7. No, if you're just use have that forward-thinking thought, but don't feel that pinch to always be on the latest and greatest. Just move at the pace that works best for you. With that North Star motion to say I'm going to get there eventually, but I'm not going to just push it today. Biggest reason staying up to date is, so while the surface, like the API surface, the actual stuff you import and stuff you use from Angular might look the same from every single release, but there's so much that changes underneath the hood. Like you would not believe from 2 to 4, because there was no 3, from 2 to 4, they basically like changed so much about the rendering engine, so how all the divs and everything get generated behind the scenes that was massively different. And then the same thing happened actually from 4 to 5. And then now from 5, what is it going to be, from like 6 to 7, it's actually from 5 to 6 it happened again, and then from 6 to 7 it's going to be even different because of Ivy. So if that's one thing that like you leave here today, at least from something I've said, like go look at like Angular Ivy, the new renderer they're coming out with. It itself does not really affect you, but it basically changes the footprint of your Angular app, becomes drastically smaller. And like instead of it costing like 80 kilobytes to spin up an Angular app, it can start out with like 3 kilobytes. It's like massively different. And that's all because of staying up to date. Like that API service layer, they try really, really, really hard to have that not affect you. They try to just kind of swap out the engine, but you're still using the same steering wheel. Sometimes they have to like modify the steering wheel so like you can use it properly, but those changes are usually worth it because it is like that's a massive difference to be dropping 90% of your JavaScript bundle size on some Angular part. Like it's an instant free upgrade, like going from like HTTP to HTTP2. It's like nothing's different, you just get better speed. So those are really like the biggest reasons.
Yeah, and in my case, aside from the performance boost, because they constantly keep iterating and making it better, it's just much easier to upgrade a very small version than it is to have to wait a full year or because at that point, everything breaks and you don't even know what went wrong and where. And so you probably have to start from scratch.
Yeah, I think the key thing is to use good programming practices, solid principles, separation of concerns, good layers. Your domain features could be these verticals and such. So these are all good practices, and they've been around for a long time. But I think Angular gives you the capability of really implementing. From my background, I've been mostly doing back-end development in architectures and structures. So I can leverage the same patterns and practices in terms of like a facade pattern for services and a business provider with actions that implement like a template method pattern with generic repositories and such. And because of TypeScript being the type of language that it is, we can have abstract classes, we can have interfaces, you can have base classes, you can use object-oriented programming mechanisms to really enhance your environment. So instead of copying that method from component to component to component, why not create a base class and put it in that base class and extend from there for that component? That's just one thing you can do. The other thing is really big for us is our libraries and moving towards a workspace environment. We did that about 2 months ago, and it's working out really awesome. All of our applications use the same libraries. When we compile all of our applications at the same time, so we know that there's like the earliest point of continuous integration is right at that point of compiling applications, and we know if there's a problem. And all of our applications stay up to date with the libraries that we're using, so we never have this like orphan project that's kind of just sitting on the back burner waiting for somebody to bring it in and update it to the newest versions of the libraries that we're using. So that doesn't happen. Well, it happens to one app. So 5 out of 6 of our apps we have in this workspace. So their app is kind of our orphan, but we're going to bring it in, but it's going to take some time. But the main apps that we work on a day-to-day basis, it really simplified our development workflow and reusability of components. We have security components. We have a core library that has a library of other components and services for notifications, messaging, different things that you need that are more kind of infrastructure or cross-cutting concerns in your application. Typically you do that on the back end. You can now do that in the front end, and you can have one library that does these things for you, like your logging service, exception handling service, things like that. Have one and reuse across all of your applications. So for us, it's really awesome to be able to do that and share those things and have kind of the same approach as you do more in back-end software like C#, .NET, Java, what have you, and use those same principles, practices, design patterns in the front end as well.
The only thing, especially with respect to Charter, Charter merged with Time Warner a couple of years ago and Bright House, and so 3 different large companies coming together. And so even now, we still have separate repos, whether it be the enterprise team or the software engineering, just kind of in their ways. But I know there's a slow push to essentially start to unify it and really go off of one. And I know the portals team especially has been doing a great job, not only creating their own custom components and whatnot that really helps other teams. And so I know one of the things that I'm going to start doing with them is to really start to tap in and put all my stuff on theirs as well. So it's kind of...
Actually, one of the things that has recently come out with Angular is Angular Elements. And so if you're familiar with like web components is like new-ish technology in the browser, and basically where you can subclass HTML elements and kind of like work as if you have control over the browser. So it's kind of like a lot which you were able to do with like Angular directives, but you don't need a library to do it. And so Angular has a new sort of like framework around compiling 2 custom elements. And that's a really big deal because when you bootstrap up an element, this is probably one of the things I'm most excited about with the future of Angular. But when you bootstrap an Angular app, you gotta like your module, and you gotta like declare your components and what's your bootstrapped component. And there's like all this information Angular needs to know. Like all you're doing is just telling Angular like, here's these things you should know about, and that's the main one you should know about, which is the tag over there. And then it takes over the whole page, and it's a lot of work just to get your app up and running. And then Angular's got to know about the whole app. It like controls that whole page, which is great if you're building a single page app. But if you're like a blog and you want to build like a chat widget, and your blog wants to use static content, you don't need that to be a single page app. So you get this static HTML, and now I want a chat app, and it's going to be a pretty intense one. So if you want to build it as an Angular app, that doesn't end up working out really well. But with Angular Elements, it does, because it compiles down to this sandboxed element. And so when you instantiate just the tag, it just goes up like a regular Angular app would outside of the whole context of an app module. So it's kind of like the old days of building things in the browsers. You just instantiate an element, and there it is. You didn't need all that extra boilerplate and all that stuff that the entire app needs. And what's kind of amazing about that is, like, let's say you're at a company that's building this huge React app, and then you see that one Angular element library that uses all this great stuff in it. Well, you can use those Angular elements inside your React app, inside your Vue app, inside any app, because it's just an element. And it's really, really cool because how portable it is. And like, to me, that's really the future, because it's like you don't have to worry about all this cruft. It doesn't matter where you are. You have an element, it just shows up. You don't have to build the same date picker over and over and over again. It's just the date picker one time.
Yeah, I have to comment about that, because if anything, that's one of the things that I'm most excited about, frankly, because of the fact that now I can. It's the same as if you're building a component and just have a tag somewhere within your Angular app, except that now you can just build that, and it's so self-contained that you can build a brand new project, just copy and paste, and essentially you're back up and running without having to do any work whatsoever, because you already did the hard work. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good answer. Yeah. Elements is very cool, and I think another cool thing is schematics. Is anyone using schematics? You really use them if you're using Angular CLI, so just based on schematics when you add a component or a module or a service to your application. But with schematics, you have the ability to create your own templates and to execute those in your application. And basically, you can reuse the ones that are already there, and you can add on to them or extend them to whatever your needs are. But it gives you the ability to basically scaffold your application like you do in ng new some app, or add a component or a service or whatnot. You can do that with your own templates. So depending on what you're building and what your domain is in terms of your business, using schematics is a real cool thing for scaffolding an app and making the work or the development environment for your team more efficient. And those are the things that kind of get me excited, along with elements and such as the tooling that allows us to focus on the problem and not how to get things working at minutia.
And while we're talking about schematics, Kevin just released an exciting new lib. Would you like to tell us about it?
Yeah, so I worked on a schematic to apply Prettier to an Angular application. So there's a couple of things you have to do to get Prettier set up. You can modify the TSLint file and add some other files and things like that. But like Matt was saying with schematics, you can code it once, and it can add files, it can modify files, it can change your whole application directory if you want to. But I think it's really powerful, and it's there's still little rough edges right now with schematics, but it's built out enough that you can start creating whatever you want for your application, whether it's a single file or an entire feature. It's pretty cool. And we also internally, we've been working on another schematic that we're about to open source here pretty soon. So imagine probably the next meetup we'll be releasing that.
So it's Firebase. So distributed state management. But NGRX is, I've been using NGRX for a really long time in combination with Firebase and other things actually. I worked on, if you remember the Firestore, which is a database that we make at Google Cloud and Firebase. When we started building it, I really wanted to build NGRX because it really fit. We had to deal with constant amount of state changes and everything. The whole thing was to show a database view of that was constantly changing. So it was literally your state changing. So using the state management library, the NGRX really, really helped out. I mean, there's like a bit of a learning curve. It's kind of like understatement, but there's a learning curve to it. But once you kind of get around that and watch all the talks, go through the pages yourself, you really start to simplify things for yourself, and it helps this huge problem you have between communicating between Angular components that in the past has just been really painful. And when you start getting like 3-4 layers deep on a tree, it starts being really important.
Yeah, NGRX as well. Although I'm starting to dabble with NGXS.
It's NGS.
That's right, excuse me, NGS.
It's very difficult to say. Is it XS? I don't know.
Yeah, so I'll write the first.
Is it? Okay, how about it?
Austin's the speaker at Denver. He's the one who wrote it.
Yeah.
Our team does not use NGRX.
Blasphemy!
No, we don't. We haven't really needed it yet. But from what I see and what I read, I read all the blog posts about it and such, and try to keep up to date with what's going on. I think it's probably a great tool for a lot of situations. I'm not sure if it's a tool one-size-fits-all type situation, so I think it depends. Just last week, I forget his name, Nathaniel Basal, he just released Akita, which is more of a repository pattern for state management, which is kind of a simplified model of that with more of a service-oriented design approach, using more of a generic repository pattern with queries and such. So I think a lot of people are really thinking about state management, which is a good thing. For me, as long as it's consistent and easy to use, extensible, and there's good resources to learn and know how to implement it, those are good things and good way to qualify a tool or some kind of package to use for state management. So for me, I'm not for it, I'm not against it. I'm the right tool for the right job, and if it works for you, then that's awesome.
No, sorry.
Yeah, I'll second that. I think until you're feeling the pain of your library, cross-component communication, like that's when you need to decide. And I think for the larger applications, NGRX, but I do like a lot of what NGXS provides. So.
Nobody knows.
No, it was XS.
No, I think it's a mystery.
I think it's NG star.
Yeah, there we go.
But to this point, you're right, it truly just depends on how complex you're going to end up building your app. I know in my case, a lot of the apps that I end up doing end up becoming complex very quickly, especially due to the number of different systems that I have to make these apps interact with. And so I would normally start it off with NGR access. That way I get all the hard work out of the way and just continue to build and expand from there.
So if you haven't learned NGRX, and I did my whole NGConf talk on this, you learn selectors first. Don't do what I did. Don't learn selectors first. You do all the wrong things, and then learn about selectors and say, I wish I would have done that. So like with NGRX, it's basically like this big JSON object that you have locally on your, running in your browser. It's a whole state tree of memory, sitting in memory that is. And so you make a change to it, and you're like, okay, here are my to-dos. And you end up getting to this point where you're like, okay, I have to-dos, but now I need to filter these to-dos, or I have a completed to-dos view, and then you get really confused with how you're going to store everything in this. And what I did was I started computing my state in my local store, like after my actual UI views, which is wrong, and you should not do that, because it's really painful, because then you have to like do eventual consistency and like, all these fan-out updates on local state, which is ridiculous. So selectors are basically queries. When you say like, do you need completed to-dos? Well, let's write a query against the to-dos that only pulls back the completed ones. So you structure your data in this very normalized, traditional SQL fashion. And then if you actually need to retrieve data from it, you just write a query towards it. And at first that's not very obvious. After you say it out loud, you're like, of course you do that. But it's not, it's one of those things that's kind of like hidden in NGRX. And when you learn it, it's just like, after that, that's pretty much, honestly, what I think is the best practice in all of NGRX is just use selectors first.
I think for me, one of the biggest ones that I just picked up, thanks to Jesse actually, is using presentational components in containers. And it's nothing more than a notion of really just separating what the front end is going to look like, and you just create a component just to focus on that, and then you just have IOs or inputs and outputs. Just have another component that does all the business logic. That's where you implement the selectors. That's where you do all heavy thinking and just pass it. So that way the front end or the presentational one is nothing more than the CSS and or the look and feel of it, whereas one is the logic. So because you can use that presentational on a bunch of different other components and or potentially even use it on other projects.
For me, I think one of the best practices that any individual or team could do is learn how to organize your code. And when you think of modules, a module is really a set of related things grouped together. And so we look in the past year or so, by convention, you can have a core module or a shared module. Then you can have feature modules. You can also have these modules that have concerns of infrastructure or kind of cross-cutting concerns like exception handling or logging or things like that. But making sure that things that are related together are put together in terms of your modules. For example, our team, if we have a feature, we'll actually have a module for the UI, but we'll also have a service module that those components could then inject and use. So they're separated in terms of being able to call a service and have that service and all the functionality encapsulated in that module for the components to use. So really separating code, grouping it together, using all the things that Angular gives us, like components, the container components, presentational components. But modules is probably one of the key things, is getting everything together that's supposed to be together. So if you have app.module and everything's going in that like a junk drawer, I think that's a problem. And I think early on, I think a lot of people recognize that and decide, well, how do we do this a little bit better? We have shared and core modules now, which kind of separate things that are reused across the application and such. But even with your feature domains, your feature verticals, you can use one module or you can separate from UI to the back-end services and such in the app. So modules and then your shared libraries, of course, if you're using a workspace environment. So really kind of code organization is really key, keeping our application simple and allow people to work on it effectively without kind of bumping heads as we try to work through it.
And I'll just second kind of what everyone said, but I think working for Breebug, we get to see a lot of consumer applications, and I think one of the lowest hanging fruits for a big win is the presentational and containing component, and just being able to reason about your code and what's in view, what's handling the business logic. Just separating that out and leveraging one-way data flow goes a long way. Makes it easier to test, and I think maintain and eventually reuse once you get to that.
Yes.
Now, I can't speak for the entirety of Charter. Maybe James can. Do we? Yeah, so, yes, we do.
I guess I do individually. The company that I work for, my day job, we're not putting things out there in NPM for the general public. But I just to help me learn and be more connected, I have a podcast, the Angular-licious podcast. Some episodes out there on various topics, mostly about tooling, frameworks, patterns, practices, and things like that. And then I have a rules engine, which is a Rete inference rule engine that is modeled after one in .NET C# that I ported. That was the very first thing I did with TypeScript and started using that very early on in our application. So to be able to process rules and to create very complex composite rules or simple rules and combine them and have them run consistently with consistent outputs and such is really key to how we implement our business logic, how we process data validation and business rules. So that's out there. That's, the NPM is Build Motion. So you go there, you can look at the rules engine as well as an action framework for business logic, which uses a template method pattern. So that's what I do in doing that.
One question.
Sure.
I just want to ask, I want to plead ignorance on the rules engine, and I really have no idea what you're talking about. So can you pretend that you're talking to somebody who doesn't develop?
Sure.
Explain what a rules engine is.
Okay. Well, in most business apps, you have to determine something by some inputs or some target, some information. So say it's a person of a certain age. If they're 21, they can do something. If they're less than 21, they can't. So the input is their age. And basically, you could have all kinds of rules or things that you would want to apply against that information. And so typically, if you have a team of 5 developers or many teams, when you ask them to implement some business logic or some business rules, you could probably have 5 different ways of doing it. If you have 5 teams and 5 people on that team, there's probably like 25 different ways of doing it. What the rule engine does is it gives you basically the framework for you to create a rule that can be, that you can provide the input and get the output, which is a result. It tells you did it pass or fail, what the message is, and why did it fail, and it could be for various reasons. And so the framework basically provides a very simple composite pattern with the rule implementation. So you can have very simple rules, and then you can have composite rules that are made up of other composites or other simple rules. That's kind of the technical term, but it's a simple composite pattern, which has been around for over 2-3 decades. It's been around forever, but in computer science, it's been well defined for multiple decades now. But that's what it does, and I implemented it in TypeScript, and our team uses it quite effectively in doing very complex calculations, algorithms, business rule processing, as well as data validation. And someone might wonder, well, why don't you use the Angular validation for your components and your inputs and such? Use those as well, but in addition to that, you have another tool that kind of gives you a more kind of industrial strength kind of rule processing.
What was the question again? Community, right?
Yeah, obviously at Prebug we do the meetups here, Rocky Mountain Angular, and obviously Angular Denver, which is coming up in August, and as well as a couple open source projects.
So like, by one code base, I mean like basically it's not Git, but Google's like one, it's just literally one code repository. Like your project, like when I first started doing engineering work at Google, I kept saying like, how do I get to the repository? And I meant like, how do I get to the code so my folder? And then they were like, it's not a repository. It's all one repository. And I was like, just how do I get to the repository? And I didn't really have to care. But technically there is one folder within Google that is all of the code. And all tests can actually affect the entire code base. So that code could be in Java, it could be in JavaScript, Python, Ruby, it can be in anything. And so it's just files and folders running with source control. And so there's this really sophisticated tooling they have where you've probably seen it open up in the community with Bazel, which is like a build tool. And that's based off of the internal tool that Google uses called Blaze. And so with what you do is you write these write rules, which is similar. You write these build rules. You say basically take these files, build them here, do these things, run these tests, and then you basically run dependencies on other rules. And so what happens is you could be really far down the tree and you could run up the tree and you would run somebody else's tests. And so Angular has this actually. So if you're using an Angular project at Google, you're using one of their rules and then they know that you're an Angular project. So if they push code changes in, you then pull from them. And then if something broke, they can't submit. They have to or they have to basically fix it, or if it did somehow submit, they'd have to roll it back. So like, it's not just one code base, isn't like one style of code. It is one code base and one way to manage all different styles of code. It's something that if you really only care about it's a software engineering effort that you would have to really care about I had this format and now it turned into this format, or I touched this thing over here and this thing broke because of it. So it's a very different mindset. Personally, something that I really didn't, that's not I'm more of a UI focused kind of person, but it's an interesting thing, but yeah, it's kind of hard to think about it at such scale, especially when I first joined, that you could write some JavaScript code that will break some Java code somewhere else. So it's not always just one code or one style, one language, it's everything. Outside of native script and some stuff Ionic does, there's not a really strong
Flutter.
Flutter. Well, Flutter is a little different, but I'm saying from Angular to native direction, there's nothing really like that outside of native script. So at Google, if you're going to write an Android app, you're working with the Android team. You're usually going to write it in Kotlin or Java, and then iOS apps at Google are predominantly written in Objective-C, and I haven't seen any Swift. It's all Objective-C there's a very strict set of approved languages. And so a lot of apps are all written in Objective-C, and then they do a lot of fancy things to build, to share business logic across apps and stuff like that might be written in C++ or something, because you write C++ on anything. So there's a lot of fancy things they do, but there's nothing quite like React Native, I would say, that's being used at Google. Flutter, which is all written in Dart, is similar to that, but I don't have a use case like Facebook does, where Dart is powering something like that, or Flutter is. Of course, somebody who works on Flutter is probably screaming at me right now. They're like, no, it's not true. I don't know.
Well, and the Angular team contributes to NativeScript.
Yes.
A bunch of them do contribute to NativeScript, so if you are curious about that, Nathan Walker is a good resource to follow, and he wrote a really cool library called XPlat, which is designed on Angular CLI and 6, which allow you to use the sort of mono repo structure and write in one language in one place and actually compile out to all 3 different versions. So you can do iOS, Android, and your web all from essentially the same code base, sharing many of the same things. They presented at NGConf. I helped with the demo on that, and it's a really cool product. So if you're curious about that, Angular does contribute a fair amount to that, so it'll be a long-lived project.
Learn browser stuff. Angular's gonna take a lot of that away from you, but when you do something wrong inside the browser, it's unforgiving. It's this is wrong. All that stuff that was then when you wrote it on your machine, this is now. This is broken in the browser with browser stuff. This is the JavaScript, this is the CSS, this is the HTML, this is the DOM API. You need to learn those things. Angular is a tool that will get you there. But at the end of the day, whether you're writing Angular, React, Polymer, Vue, whatever app, it all goes to the browser. It's all HTML, CSS, and JavaScript written on APIs in the browser. Those things need to be understood more than anything else. And then if you understand those, then you can see what Angular is doing, and you can debug those problems so much easier.
Just saying, some of the comment is really the fact that when you're working on the front end, you're just think small And then just think about Lego blocks really. When you're building this one thing, make sure you just build that one thing correctly. Because ultimately you'll have like 10 different Lego blocks, and from start to finish, it's broken and you just don't know where. So understanding that as you build it, and how the information flows, especially with related to the design.
I'd also add to that and suggest don't create anything that already exists. Angular gives you a lot of things, modules, services, learn how they interact with each other, learn how components work together. You got the presentational and the container components, things like that. Learn about the dependency injection, how that works, because you're probably familiar with that. The back end, they have their own, so you don't need to create that. So use the tools they give you, the CLI, get very comfortable with that, learn its capabilities, and just do it the Angular way, use Angular Force.
Yeah, learn some CSS, because you'll probably pick up the rest of the stuff. I look up how to center a div like every 6 months.
Flexbox. Learn
CSS and
Flexbox.
Flexbox.
Forget everything we said, just learn Flexbox.